You keep giving second chances to people who have already shown you their true nature, watching them smile to your face while undermining your efforts behind closed doors. Every act of kindness you extend to these betrayers only emboldens them. Further, while you wonder why your generosity is met with sabotage and your trust is repaid with treachery, I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and I learned the hard way that in the ruthless world of politics, showing mercy to those who betray you is not virtue, it is weakness that invites your own destruction. During my years serving the Florentine Republic, I witnessed firsthand how misplaced loyalty and continued kindness toward treacherous allies led to the downfall of princes and the collapse of states. What I discovered about human nature and the dynamics of betrayal will transform how you handle deception in your personal and professional life. The principles I developed while navigating the treacherous courts of Renaissance Italy will show you exactly when to withdraw your trust, how to protect yourself from repeated betrayal, and why sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop being nice to those who have proven themselves unworthy of your goodness. The same insights that helped me understand the rise and fall of kingdoms apply perfectly to modern relationships, workplace dynamics, and personal boundaries. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. Want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of strategic trust? I was barely 30 when I learned that the very kindness I considered virtuous could become the instrument of my destruction. It was the autumn of 1503, and the first served as second chancellor of the Florentine Republic, believing wholeheartedly that good faith and generous spirit would be met with the same dot. Francesco Soderini, brother to our Gonfalonier, had been caught in what could charitably be called financial irregularities with funds meant for our military campaigns. The evidence was clear, the damage significant, yet when he came to me with tears in his eyes, speaking of his family's honor and his children's future, I felt moved to mercy. Here was a man I had known for years, someone who had shared meals at my table and whose wife had attended my own wedding. Against my better judgment, I chose to handle the matter quietly. I restructured the accounts, covered the missing funds from other sources, and gave Francesco what I believed was a second chance at redemption. I thought I was showing the kind of Christian mercy that builds lasting loyalty and transforms a man's heart. How wrong I was. Within 3 months, Francesco had not only resumed his embezzlement, but had begun spreading rumors that I was the one skimming from the military budget. He produced documents cleverly forged that seemed to implicate me in the very crimes I had helped him conceal. When the accusations reached the ears of the Signoria, I found myself defending against charges that could have meant exile or death. The forged letter that nearly destroyed me bore my seal, yet contained agreements I had never made and promises that would have constituted treason. Francesco had used his time and my trust to study my correspondence, my handwriting, even the particular way I pressed my seal into wax. He had weaponized my own compassion against me. Standing before the tribunal, I realized with crystalline clarity that my kindness had been interpreted not as strength but as weakness to be exploited. Francesco had never seen my mercy as virtue, he had seen it as evidence that I was a fool who could be manipulated. My generosity had not reformed his character. It had simply taught him that I was someone who would absorb losses to avoid conflict. The investigation eventually cleared me, but only after months of suspicion and political isolation. Other officials who had once sought my counsel now avoided me, fearing association with someone under such serious charges. My influence waned, my effectiveness diminished, all because I had chosen to extend grace to someone who viewed grace as opportunity. But Francesco's betrayal taught me something invaluable about human nature. There are people in this world who cannot conceive of kindness except as a weakness to be exploited. They do not see mercy as noble, they see it as evidence that you lack the strength to enforce consequences. To such people, your forgiveness is not a gift. It is proof that you can be taken advantage of repeatedly. I learned that day that there is a fundamental difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who makes a calculation. Francesco had not stumbled into corruption. He had planned it. When caught, he had not sought redemption. He had sought a shield. And when given mercy, he had not felt gratitude. He had felt contempt for the man foolish enough to provide it. This lesson would guide every political decision I made thereafter. Trust, I realized, is not a renewable resource to be given freely. It is a strategic asset to be allocated carefully, withdrawn when betrayed, and never restored to those who have demonstrated they view your kindness as their opportunity. After my experience with Francesco, I became a student of betrayal. I began to observe the patterns, the tells, the subtle behaviors that distinguish those who might stumble from those who will certainly strike. What I discovered was that betrayers are not random actors. They follow predictable patterns, and once you understand their anatomy, you can spot them before they wound you. The first characteristic I noticed is what I call conditional loyalty. These individuals express fierce dedication when it serves their interests, but their commitment evaporates the moment circumstances change. They speak of loyalty as if it were a negotiation rather than a principle. Of course, I support you, but if the Medici return to power, you know I'm on your team, unless it affects my position with. They always leave themselves an escape route. Cesare Borgia possessed an ornate mirror, framed in gold and studded with gems, which he consulted constantly during our meetings. I came to understand that this mirror represented more than vanity. Symbolized how certain people see the world. Everything they encounter is viewed through the lens of personal benefit. They cannot look at a relationship, an opportunity, or even a crisis without immediately calculating what it means for them. True betrayers also display a peculiar relationship with truth. They are not simply liars. Many honest people lie occasionally to spare feelings or avoid conflict. Betrayers lie strategically, weaving deceptions that serve multiple purposes. They lie to test your gullibility, to create leverage, and to maintain multiple versions of reality that can be deployed as needed. Francesco, for instance, had told 3 different people 3 different stories about his financial troubles, each tailored to what he thought they wanted to hear. Watch carefully how people speak about those who trusted them in the past. The betrayer will always find reasons why their previous relationships failed due to the other person's inadequacy. My last business partner was too cautious. My former friend became jealous of my success. My previous supervisor couldn't handle my initiative. They never accept responsibility for broken trust because they never believed they were truly obligated to maintain it. Another revealing pattern is their response to your vulnerabilities. When you share a weakness, concern, or fear with someone, observe what they do with that information. Trustworthy people treat your vulnerabilities as sacred trusts, either offering support or respectfully staying silent. Betrayers collect your weaknesses like weapons, storing them for future use. They may not deploy them immediately. The wise betrayer waits for the perfect moment, but they never forget what you've revealed. Pay attention to how they handle confidences. Someone who gossips to you about others' private matters will eventually gossip about yours. I learned to test people by sharing carefully chosen pieces of information, then tracking where those details appeared. Those who could not keep small confidences inevitably failed with larger ones. The betrayer also displays what I term strategic empathy. They can mirror emotions and concerns with remarkable accuracy, but only when it advances their agenda. They excel at saying exactly what you need to hear when you need to hear it. This false empathy feels different from genuine care because it's too perfectly timed, too precisely calibrated to your current emotional state. Most tellingly, Betrayers cannot genuinely celebrate your independent successes. When you achieve something that doesn't directly benefit them, watch their response carefully. Genuine allies feel authentic joy at your victories. Betrayers feel threatened by your independent strength because it reduces their ability to manipulate you through dependency. Finally, observe their relationship with accountability. When confronted with evidence of their harmful behavior, betrayers employ a predictable sequence: denial, deflection, minimization, and finally, victimization. They never simply acknowledge wrongdoing and commit to change. Instead, they craft elaborate explanations for why their actions were justified, misunderstood, or blown out of proportion. Understanding these patterns transformed my ability to navigate relationships strategically. I stopped taking betrayal personally and started recognizing it as the predictable behavior of predictable people. This knowledge allowed me to protect myself while still remaining open to genuine connection with those who proved themselves worthy of trust. The most dangerous misconception good people harbor is that kindness toward betrayers will eventually transform them. I held this belief myself until I witnessed its devastating consequences, not just in my own life, but in the lives of princes and republics that fell because they confused mercy with wisdom. When you continue being nice to someone who has betrayed you, you send a clear message. Betrayal carries no real consequences. The betrayer learns that they can wound you and still retain access to your resources, your trust, and your goodwill. This is not mercy, it is training them to betray you more effectively next time. I keep in my study a broken wax seal, snapped cleanly in half, that once secured important correspondence between Florence and France. It serves as a reminder of how continued trust in proven betrayers breaks the very bonds that hold relationships and institutions together. When seals are broken, letters can be read, altered, or replaced. When trust is continuously extended despite evidence of unworthiness, the same vulnerabilities emerge. The psychological toll of repeatedly extending kindness to those who abuse it cannot be overstated. I watched Piero Soderini grow physically ill from the stress of managing relationships with people he knew would eventually stab him in the back. His hair grayed rapidly, his sleep became fitful, and his decision-making grew erratic as he tried to maintain pleasant relations with those plotting his downfall. Each time you absorb a betrayal without consequence, you diminish your own authority. Others observe how you handle deception, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. If they see that betraying you results in nothing more than a gentle conversation and continued access to your favor, they begin to view you as someone whose boundaries are meaningless. Betrayers specifically target kind people because they know such individuals will rationalize their behavior. Perhaps he didn't mean it that way. Maybe she's going through a difficult time. I should be more understanding. These thoughts, which spring from genuine compassion, become weapons in the hands of those who exploit compassion for personal gain. When you remain nice to betrayers, you also send a message to your genuine allies that loyalty provides no special advantage. They watch you treat the faithful and the treacherous with equal warmth, and they begin to question why they should maintain higher standards. Some of your best supporters may begin to distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone who cannot distinguish between friend and enemy. The energy you spend managing relationships with betrayers is energy stolen from nurturing relationships with those who deserve it. I calculated once that I was spending more time dealing with 3 problematic individuals than I was investing in 20 reliable allies. This allocation made no strategic sense. I was watering weeds while my garden withered. Betrayers interpret continued kindness as weakness, but they also interpret it as stupidity. They begin to view you with contempt, seeing your mercy as evidence that you lack the intelligence to recognize what they're doing to you. This contempt breeds more aggressive betrayal because they lose respect for your judgment entirely. Perhaps most dangerously, continuing to be nice to betrayers corrupts your own character over time. You begin to accept lower standards of behavior from everyone. You start rationalizing clearly unacceptable conduct. You develop tolerance for disrespect, dishonesty, and disloyalty that would have appalled your younger self. The financial and professional costs compound over time as well. Betrayers who face no consequences for their actions grow bolder in their exploitation. They may begin stealing larger amounts, spreading more damaging rumors, or sabotaging more important projects. What starts as minor transgressions escalates to major damage because you've trained them to believe you'll absorb any level of harm they inflict. Finally, your reputation suffers when others see you consistently extending favor to those who harm you. People begin to question your judgment, your strength, and your fitness for leadership. They wonder if someone who cannot protect themselves from obvious threats can be trusted to protect the interests of others. No lesson in the dangers of misplaced mercy struck me more forcefully than watching the destruction of Piero Soderini, Gonfalonier of the Florentine Republic. I served under this good man for nearly a decade, and his downfall haunts me still, not because it was unpredictable, but because it was entirely preventable. Soderini possessed every virtue except the one that might have saved him, the wisdom to recognize when kindness becomes complicity in your own destruction. He was learned, pious, genuinely devoted to the Republic's welfare, and constitutionally incapable of believing that others might not share his noble intentions. These qualities made him beloved by the people and fatally vulnerable to those who saw his goodness as opportunity. The blood-stained cloak he wore during his final exile now hangs in my memory as a testament to where excessive mercy leads. Those stains came not from battle wounds inflicted by foreign enemies, but from the stones thrown by Florentine citizens he had trusted too completely and served too faithfully. The first betrayal Soderini should have punished, but didn't, came from the Rucellai family. Giovanni Rucellai had been caught secretly negotiating with Pisan representatives while serving on the committee for the Pisan War. When confronted with evidence of his treachery, Rucellai wept, spoke of momentary weakness, and begged for another chance to prove his loyalty. Soderini, moved by what seemed like genuine remorse, quietly transferred Rucellai to a different position rather than pursuing charges. Within a year, Rucellai was back to his old patterns, this time passing information to Venetian agents about our defensive preparations. Again, when discovered, he produced elaborate explanations and renewed promises of reform. Again, Soderini chose mercy over justice, believing that continued trust would eventually transform a treacherous nature. But Rucellai's behavior taught others a crucial lesson. Betraying the Gonfalonier carried no serious consequences. This knowledge spread through Florence's political circles like plague through a crowded city. Soon, other families began testing the boundaries of Soderini's tolerance. The Albizzi faction started undermining military appointments, ensuring that commands went to their allies rather than the most qualified candidates. When evidence of their interference emerged, they claimed they were acting in the Republic's best interests by preventing inexperienced leaders from taking charge. Soderini accepted these explanations and continued including them in strategic discussions. Bernardo del Nero began sharing details of confidential council meetings with exiled Medici supporters, justifying his actions as attempts to maintain dialogue with all Florentine factions. When letters proving his communications were intercepted, Del Nero argued he was gathering intelligence on Medici plans. Soderini praised his initiative rather than punishing his betrayal. Each act of mercy was interpreted by the conspirators as evidence of weakness rather than strength. They began to speak openly about Soderini's naivety, calling him a fool who could be manipulated through appeals to his better nature. They stopped fearing his authority because they had learned that no Transgression would result in real consequences. The final conspiracy that toppled Soderini was led by the very people he had forgiven most often. Rucellai, Del Nero, and the Albizzi faction coordinated with Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici to time a military crisis with internal revolt. They used their continued access to Soderini's inner circle to ensure that loyal forces were positioned away from Florence when the Medici army approached. When the crisis came, Soderini found himself abandoned by those he had trusted most. Families he had protected turned against him in his moment of greatest need. The positions he had allowed them to keep were used as platforms to rally opposition to his leadership. The confidences he had continued to share with them became weapons, deployed against the republic he loved. I was with Soderini during his final hours in power. He sat in his chamber, staring at reports of his supporters fleeing the city, still unable to comprehend how his mercy had been repaid with such calculated cruelty. I gave them every chance, he kept repeating. I treated them as I would want to be treated. That was precisely his error. Soderini had extended Christian charity to men who operated by pagan principles. He had offered trust to people who viewed trust as a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. He had shown mercy to individuals who interpreted mercy as permission to transgress again. The tragedy of Soderini's fall was not that he was overthrown by enemies that fate awaits all leaders eventually. The tragedy was that he was destroyed by people he could have controlled, using information he had voluntarily provided through positions he had permitted them to retain. His kindness had become the architect of his own destruction. His exile should serve as a warning to anyone who believes that persistent goodness will eventually shame betrayers into loyalty. Some people are incapable of shame, immune to guilt, and motivated only by advantage. Treating such individuals as if they shared your moral framework is not noble. It is strategic suicide. Once you recognize that someone has betrayed your trust, and will likely do so again, the next challenge becomes executing a strategic withdrawal that protects your interests without creating unnecessary drama or exposing you to retaliation. This process requires the precision of a navigator plotting a course through dangerous waters. I keep on my desk a compass that belonged to a Venetian merchant who successfully traded throughout the Mediterranean despite constant threats from pirates, rival traders, and corrupt officials. He survived and prospered because he understood that withdrawal from dangerous relationships, like navigation, requires careful calculation of distance, direction, and timing. The first principle of strategic withdrawal is to reduce your emotional investment before reducing your practical engagement. Betrayers are often skilled at detecting changes in their access to your affections, and they may become more aggressive if they sense you pulling away emotionally while still maintaining regular contact. Begin by cultivating inner detachment while keeping your external behavior temporarily consistent. Start by changing the nature of information you share. Move from discussing your hopes, fears, and plans to limiting conversations to immediate, practical matters. If someone has proven they cannot be trusted with your vulnerabilities, stop providing them with new ammunition. Share only what they need to know for legitimate purposes, nothing more. Implement what I call graduated distance, rather than abruptly cutting all contact, which may provoke retaliation or create professional difficulties. Reduce the frequency and depth of your interactions systematically. If you previously met weekly, move to bi-weekly, then monthly. If you once shared personal concerns, limit discussions to work matters only. Pay careful attention to the logistics of access. Betrayers often rely on physical proximity to gather information and exert influence. Start limiting their opportunities to observe your activities, overhear your conversations, or position themselves as indispensable to your daily operations. This might mean changing meeting locations, adjusting your schedule, or simply closing your office door during sensitive discussions. Develop alternative sources for anything you currently depend on them to provide. If they handle certain tasks, train others to perform those functions. If they serve as your connection to particular networks, begin building direct relationships with those contacts. The goal is to eliminate their ability to leverage necessity into continued access to your time and trust. Document everything, but do so discreetly. Keep records of commitments they make and fail to honor, promises they break, and instances where their actions contradict their stated intentions. This documentation serves two purposes. It reminds you why withdrawal is necessary when your compassionate instincts try to override your judgment, and it protects you if they later attempt to. Rewrite the history of your relationship. Master the art of the pleasant non-commitment. When betrayers try to engage you in future plans, respond with phrases like "I'll need to see how things develop," or "let me get back to you on that." This approach avoids the confrontation that comes with direct refusal while gradually reducing their expectations of continued collaboration. Create natural boundaries through structural changes. If someone has proven untrustworthy, stop including them in meetings where sensitive information is discussed. Assign them to projects where their access to critical resources is limited. Transfer responsibilities that require high trust to more reliable individuals. Frame these changes as organizational improvements rather than punitive measures. When possible, let time and distance do the work for you. People who betray trust often create problems with multiple individuals simultaneously. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, allow their pattern of behavior to become apparent to others naturally. This approach protects you from being seen as vindictive, while letting their reputations suffer based on their own actions. Be prepared for escalation attempts. When betrayers sense they're losing access to you, they may try to force renewed intimacy through crisis creation, emotional manipulation, or attempts to make themselves indispensable. Having anticipated these tactics, you can respond with measured concern rather than reactive engagement. Develop a new inner circle gradually while withdrawing from the old one. Don't leave yourself isolated in the process of protecting yourself from betrayers. Identify trustworthy individuals who can eventually fill the roles that betrayers once occupied in your professional and personal life. The ultimate goal of strategic withdrawal is not revenge, it's protection. You want to reach a position where the betrayer can no longer significantly harm your interests, access your resources, or manipulate your emotions, while avoiding the drama and retaliation that often accompany direct confrontation. This requires patience, consistency, and the discipline to resist the generous impulses that made you vulnerable to betrayal in the first place. History offers no more perfect example of the fatal consequences of ignoring betrayal's warning signs than the assassination of Julius Caesar. I have studied this case extensively because it illustrates how even the most powerful and intelligent leaders can be destroyed by their failure to act decisively against those who have already revealed their treacherous nature. In my collection, I keep a Roman denarius minted just before the Ides of March, showing Caesar's profile in proud relief. This coin reminds me that even emperors fall when they mistake proximity for loyalty and ignore the clear signals that betrayal is approaching. Caesar's murder was not a sudden conspiracy, was the predictable outcome of his repeated failure to address earlier acts of disloyalty. The most crucial warning Caesar ignored came from Marcus Brutus himself. Long before the assassination conspiracy, Brutus had publicly criticized Caesar's accumulation of power, questioned his decision-making in Senate meetings, and maintained suspiciously close relationships with Caesar's known enemies. These were not subtle hints, they were clear declarations that Brutus valued abstract political principles more than personal loyalty. Caesar knew about Brutus's philosophical opposition to autocracy. He knew that Brutus idolized his ancestor, who had expelled the last king of Rome. He knew that. Brutus spent his evenings in the company of senators who spoke openly about the need to restore the Republic. Yet Caesar continued treating Brutus as a beloved son, sharing his plans, including him in private councils, and even naming him in his will. This was not mercy, it was strategic blindness. Caesar's affection for Brutus prevented him from acknowledging what Brutus had already demonstrated, that when forced to choose between personal loyalty and political ideology, Brutus would choose ideology. A wise leader would have distanced himself from someone whose fundamental values guaranteed eventual conflict. The same pattern appeared in Caesar's relationships with other conspirators. Cassius had previously shown hostility towards Caesar's rise, making cutting remarks about Caesar's physical weaknesses and questioning his fitness for supreme command. Trebonius had participated in schemes to limit Caesar's authority through legislation. Decimus Brutus had accepted Caesar's generosity while maintaining alliances with Caesar's political opponents. Each of these men had revealed their essential nature through smaller acts of disloyalty, yet Caesar continued including them in his inner circle. He seemed to believe that his personal magnetism and continued favor would eventually win their wholehearted devotion. This belief cost him his life. The lesson for modern leaders is clear. When someone shows you through their actions that they value something more than their relationship with you, whether it's ideology, ambition, or approval from others, believe them. Don't assume that continued kindness will change their fundamental priorities. Caesar also made the fatal error of thinking that his enemies needed overwhelming reasons to act against him. He couldn't imagine that people he had treated well would kill him simply because they disapproved of his political direction. But betrayers don't require proportional justification for their actions. They need only opportunity and rationalization. The conspirators convinced themselves that murdering Caesar was noble because it served the greater good of republican government. This self-serving reasoning allowed them to view their betrayal as heroism rather than treachery. Never underestimate people's ability to justify betraying you. If they can frame their actions as serving a higher cause. Caesar's greatest tactical error was ignoring the evidence of coordination among his enemies. He knew that Brutus, Cassius, and others met frequently. He knew they shared similar political views. He knew they had historical and philosophical reasons to oppose autocracy. Yet he failed to recognize that shared opposition to his leadership made them natural allies against him. When people who have shown individual signs of disloyalty begin associating with each other, the danger multiplies exponentially. Isolated betrayers may hesitate to act alone, but when they find others who share their hostile feelings, they gain courage, justification, and operational support for their treachery. Caesar received multiple specific warnings about the conspiracy and dismissed them all. His wife dreamed of his death and begged him not to go to the Senate. A soothsayer warned him to beware the Ides of March. Spurina, the haruspex, interpreted ominous signs in sacrificial offerings. Even on the morning of his assassination, someone pressed a scroll into his hands containing details of the plot. He ignored these warnings because he had grown accustomed to thinking of himself as invulnerable. His past successes in battle and politics had convinced him that his enemies were too weak and disorganized to threaten him seriously. This confidence blinded him to the reality that betrayal often comes not from strength, but from desperation. The ultimate tragedy of Caesar's death was its preventability. Had he acted on any of the warning signs, distancing himself from the conspirators, increasing his security, or simply staying home on March 15th, he might have lived to enjoy his victories for decades longer. Instead, his failure to take betrayal seriously made him a perfect victim for those who had already shown their willingness to put principles before personal loyalty. The phrase selective cruelty disturbs those who prefer to see the world in simple terms of kindness versus harshness. But I have learned that strategic firmness, what might appear as cruelty to the naive, often prevents far greater suffering than misplaced mercy ever could. The iron glove, worn when necessary, protects more people than the velvet hand that refuses to restrain those who would harm others. Keep in my study a metal gauntlet that once belonged to Cesare Borgia, a man who understood better than most that measured force applied at the right moment prevents the need for devastating force later. This glove reminds me that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is ensure that betrayers face consequences severe enough to deter them from harming others. When I speak of selective cruelty, I do not mean arbitrary harshness or revenge-driven retaliation. I mean the calculated application of consequences that serve specific strategic purposes, protecting yourself and others from further harm, deterring similar behavior from other potential betrayers, and maintaining the credibility of your boundaries. The key word is selective. Not everyone who disappoints you deserves harsh treatment. Not every mistake requires punishment. Not every conflict demands a firm response. But when someone has demonstrated a pattern of betrayal, when they have shown they view your kindness as weakness and your trust as opportunity, then measured firmness becomes necessary for everyone's protection. Consider the difference between a merchant who accidentally delivers inferior goods due to supplier problems versus one who knowingly sells defective merchandise while claiming it meets specifications. The first deserves patience and an opportunity to correct the problem. The second deserves immediate consequences that prevent him from cheating other customers. The same principle applies to personal relationships. Someone who betrays you once might deserve a conversation and a chance to repair the damage. Someone who betrays you repeatedly while promising reform deserves consequences that protect you and send a clear message to others about your boundaries. Effective, selective cruelty operates on multiple levels simultaneously. First, it eliminates the betrayer's ability to continue harming you by removing their access to your resources, information, and trust. Second, it serves as education for others who might consider similar behavior. Third, it maintains your reputation as someone whose boundaries have meaning. I learned this lesson while dealing with a series of minor officials who had been embezzling small amounts from various municipal funds. My initial response was to handle each case quietly, allowing the guilty parties to repay the missing funds without facing public consequences. I thought this approach showed appropriate mercy while solving the immediate problem. Instead, word spread throughout the bureaucracy that stealing from the city resulted in nothing more than a private conversation and the inconvenience of repayment. Within 6 months, I was dealing with a dozen new cases of embezzlement, each involving larger amounts and more creative schemes. My mercy had become an incentive for further theft. When I finally decided to prosecute one embezzler publicly, sentencing him to exile and public humiliation, the epidemic of theft stopped immediately. The selective application of harsh consequences accomplished what months of gentle correction had failed to achieve. One man's suffering prevented dozens of others from making the same destructive choice. This principle extends beyond professional situations. In personal relationships, the failure to impose consequences on betrayers often leads to their escalating harmful behavior. Someone who lies to you repeatedly while facing no meaningful consequences will begin lying about more serious matters. Someone who breaks small commitments without penalty will eventually break major ones. The art lies in calibrating your response appropriately. The consequences should be proportional to the betrayal and sufficient to deter repetition, but not so severe as to destroy someone unnecessarily or damage your own reputation for fairness. The goal is correction and protection, not destruction. Timing matters enormously in the application of selective cruelty. Consequences delayed are consequences diminished. If you wait months or years to address a pattern of betrayal, The connection between behavior and consequence becomes unclear to both the betrayer and observers. Swift, proportional consequences are more effective than delayed, severe ones. You must also be prepared for the betrayer's attempts to portray your firmness as unreasonable harshness. They will often try to mobilize sympathy by emphasizing your response while minimizing their original betrayal. This manipulation tactic works especially well with generous people who begin to doubt their own judgment when accused of being mean or unforgiving. Remember that protecting yourself and others from continued harm is not cruelty, is responsibility. A physician who allows an infected limb to remain attached out of misplaced compassion will eventually lose the patient. A leader who refuses to remove destructive individuals from positions where they can cause damage will eventually lose the organization. After learning to identify and withdraw from betrayers, the next crucial skill is building a small circle of genuinely trustworthy allies. This process requires entirely different instincts than those that make you vulnerable to betrayal. You must learn to recognize and reward loyalty, rather than simply extending trust to those who request it. I wear a golden signet ring that has passed through the hands of only 3 truly loyal friends throughout my lifetime. Each time one of them died, he passed the ring to the next person in our circle, and eventually it came to me. This ring represents something more valuable than gold, the rare and precious nature of authentic trustworthiness in a world full of conditional allegiances. The first principle of building your inner circle is to observe people's behavior over time rather than accepting their statements about their character. Loyalty is demonstrated through actions, especially actions taken when loyalty costs something or provides no immediate benefit. Watch how potential allies behave when supporting you might disadvantage them socially, professionally, or financially. True loyalty reveals itself most clearly during times of crisis or controversy. When you face criticism, setbacks, or opposition, notice who stands with you and who suddenly becomes unavailable. The people who defend you when it's unpopular to do so, who maintain their association with you when others flee, who offer help during your difficult periods. These are the individuals worthy of your deepest trust. I learned this lesson during my imprisonment and torture in 1513, when the Medici suspected me of conspiracy. Most of my former colleagues disappeared entirely, afraid that association with me would damage their own standing with the new regime. But a handful of friends continued visiting my family, providing financial support and advocating for my release despite the personal risk these actions entailed. Look for people who demonstrate what I call consistent character. They treat subordinates with the same respect they show superiors. They maintain similar ethical standards in private as in public, and their fundamental values remain stable across different social contexts. Such people are rare, but when you find them, they form the foundation of unshakable alliances. Test potential allies gradually and carefully. Begin by sharing less sensitive information and smaller responsibilities, then observe how they handle these trusts. Do they keep confidences even when sharing them might bring them social credit? Do they complete tasks reliably even when no one is monitoring their progress? Do they tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable for both of you? Pay attention to how they speak about their other relationships. People who gossip maliciously about their other friends will eventually gossip about you, but individuals who speak respectfully of former allies, who maintain appropriate boundaries around others' private information, and who seem capable of long-term friendships are more likely to honor their commitments to you. Mutual benefit creates stronger bonds than one-sided generosity. The most stable alliances are those where both parties contribute value and receive value in return. This doesn't mean relationships should be transactional, but rather that both people should feel they gain something meaningful from the association beyond the other person's kindness. I formed my most enduring political alliance with Francesco Vittori partly because we each possessed knowledge and connections that benefited the other. He had access to PayPal circles where I was unwelcome. I had insights into Florentine politics that served his diplomatic purposes. Our friendship was genuine, but it was strengthened by our ability to help each other achieve our respective goals. Build your inner circle slowly and deliberately. It's better to have 3 genuinely loyal allies than 30 superficial connections. Deep relationships require significant investment of time and emotional energy. Resources you cannot spread too thinly without diminishing the quality of all your relationships. Create regular opportunities for your trusted allies to interact with each other. A cohesive inner circle becomes more than the sum of its parts when the members know and support one another. This also provides you with valuable perspective, as people you trust can help you evaluate new potential allies or warn you about emerging threats. Be worthy of the loyalty you seek. Trustworthy people are attracted to others who demonstrate integrity, reliability, and genuine care for their allies' welfare. If you want people to be honest with you, be honest with them. If you want them to support you during difficulties, support them during theirs. The golden ring of trust must be earned through your own character before it can be received from others. Finally, protect your inner circle fiercely. When outsiders attack or undermine your trusted allies, defend them as vigorously as you would defend yourself. Nothing destroys loyalty faster than the perception that supporting you provides no protection in return. Your allies must know that their association with you strengthens rather than endangers their position in the world. One of the most transformative insights I gained from my years in politics was learning to treat trust as a finite resource requiring careful allocation. Like a merchant managing his capital, you must invest your emotional energy and vulnerability where they will generate the highest returns, while avoiding relationships that consistently operate at a loss. On my desk sits a brass merchant scale, perfectly balanced, that once belonged to Lorenzo de' Medici's chief treasurer. This scale reminds me that every relationship requires a careful weighing of what you give against what you receive, not in a cold, calculating manner, but with the wisdom to recognize when you're pouring resources into ventures that will never prove profitable. The first step in developing sound emotional economics is recognizing that your capacity for trust, vulnerability, and emotional support is limited. You cannot extend deep care to everyone who requests it without exhausting yourself and diminishing the quality of care you can provide to those who truly deserve it. This limitation is not a character flaw, it's a fundamental reality of human psychology. I learnt this lesson painfully during my years as second chancellor. When I tried to maintain positive relationships with every faction in Florence simultaneously, I spent enormous energy managing the concerns, complaints, and requests of dozens of political figures, many of whom gave little in return. Meanwhile, I neglected to deepen my relationships with the handful of allies who could have provided real support during crises. Begin by conducting an honest audit of your current relationships. For each significant person in your life, ask yourself, what do I consistently give to this relationship? What do I consistently receive? Am I investing more trust, time, and emotional energy than I'm getting back in loyalty, support, and genuine care? This analysis often reveals uncomfortable truths. You may discover that you're spending tremendous effort maintaining relationships with people who provide little beyond the occasional pleasant conversation, while underinvesting in relationships with those who offer real support during difficult times. Consider the concept of emotional opportunity cost. Every hour you spend consoling someone who repeatedly creates their own problems is an hour you cannot spend strengthening bonds with people who use your support constructively. Every emotional crisis you absorb from a chronic complainer is energy unavailable for celebrating successes with those who appreciate your joy. I once calculated that I was spending roughly 4 hours per week managing the anxieties and complaints of a colleague who never once offered assistance when I faced challenges. Meanwhile, I was giving perhaps 30 minutes per week to a friend who had proven his loyalty through multiple difficult situations. This allocation made no strategic sense and provided no satisfaction to anyone involved. The principle of decreasing marginal returns applies powerfully to relationships. The first acts of kindness toward someone often generate significant goodwill and appreciation, but continued investment in people who take your generosity for granted produces diminishing benefits. Eventually, you reach a point where additional kindness creates no positive change and may actually encourage further exploitation. Learn to recognize the signs of a relationship operating at a persistent loss. These include conversations that drain rather than energize you, people who contact you primarily when they need something, individuals who remember your mistakes but forget your kindnesses, and those who seem unable to reciprocate emotional support when you need it. Conversely, identify your highest yield relationships, those where your investment generates compound returns over time. These typically involve people who appreciate your support, build upon your contributions rather than simply consuming them, and actively look for ways to benefit you in return. Such relationships become more valuable as they mature, creating networks of mutual support that strengthen everyone involved. Practice strategic reallocation of your emotional resources. This doesn't mean becoming cold or calculating, but rather consciously choosing to invest your limited capacity where it will generate the most satisfaction and support. Spend more time with people who energize you, and less time with those who consistently drain you. Set clear boundaries around your emotional availability. You are not obligated to absorb every crisis, mediate every conflict, or provide unlimited sympathy to everyone who requests it. Learn to say, "I understand you're going through a difficult time, but I'm not the best person to help with this." When someone seeks to make their problems your responsibility, the healthiest relationships maintain a rough balance over time, though not necessarily in each individual interaction. Someone might provide more emotional support during your crisis period than receive more during theirs. But if the ledger never balances, if you're always giving and they're always taking, the relationship is economically unsustainable. Remember that reducing your investment in low-yield relationships frees resources for higher-yield ones. When you stop pouring energy into people who don't appreciate it, you discover you have more enthusiasm and support available for those who do. This reallocation benefits everyone by ensuring your generosity goes where it can accomplish the most good. Among my most treasured possessions are the letters I exchanged with Lorenzo de' Medici during the years when his family's relationship with Florence remained uncertain. These private correspondences reveal to me how even the most powerful individuals struggle with questions of trust and betrayal, and they taught me lessons about loyalty that no political treatise could have provided. I keep Lorenzo's most revealing letter sealed in a leather portfolio that has never been opened by another soul. In it, he confessed his private thoughts about the burden of constantly evaluating whether people supported him for his own sake, or merely for the advantages his favor could provide. This confession from one of the most astute political minds of our age showed me that the challenge of distinguishing genuine loyalty from opportunistic alliance plagues everyone, regardless of their position or power. Lorenzo's approach to testing loyalty was more sophisticated than any I had previously observed. Rather than relying on grand gestures or dramatic declarations of support, he paid attention to what he called the small fidelities, how people behaved when they thought he wasn't watching, how they spoke about him when they believed he couldn't hear, and how they treated his interests when supporting him provided no immediate benefit. He once described to me an incident that perfectly illustrated this principle. Two courtiers, had both offered elaborate public support for a controversial policy he was considering, but Lorenzo had learned, through carefully placed sources, that one of them privately ridiculed the policy at dinner parties, while the other defended it, even when such defense earned him criticism from his friends. The first man's public support meant nothing. The second man's private consistency revealed genuine loyalty. This lesson transformed how I evaluated the people around me. I stopped paying attention to who praised me most effusively and began noticing who defended my decisions when I wasn't present to appreciate their support. I discovered that some of my most vocal supporters disappeared the moment supporting me became socially costly, while others who rarely offered dramatic declarations remained steadfast through every political storm. Lorenzo also taught me about the danger of what he termed luxury loyalty, support that people offer when it costs them nothing but withdraw the moment it requires sacrifice. He had observed that many allies remained faithful during periods of prosperity and peace, but abandoned him during times of crisis or controversy. True loyalty, he argued, could only be measured during adversity. This insight proved prophetic. In my own experience, when I was arrested and tortured in 1513, I learned which of my relationships had been built on genuine foundation and which had been mere conveniences. The people who had enjoyed my hospitality and claimed deep friendship vanished entirely, but a small group of individuals, some of whom I had considered only casual acquaintances, risked their own safety to help my family and advocate for my release. Lorenzo's correspondence also revealed his method for building lasting alliances. Rather than trying to win loyalty through generous gifts or special favors, he focused on creating relationships of mutual dependence and respect. He sought allies whose success was genuinely connected to his own, rather than people who might benefit from his fall. He explained this strategy through the metaphor of architecture, a building supported by pillars that gain strength from bearing weight will stand through earthquakes, but a structure held up by posts that weaken under pressure will collapse at the first serious tremor. The strongest alliances, he believed, were those where both parties became more powerful through their association rather than one simply benefiting from the other's generosity. This principle guided my approach to political relationships thereafter. I stopped trying to buy loyalty through favors and began seeking people whose interests naturally aligned with mine. Instead of making myself indispensable to others, I looked for those who could make themselves valuable to me. These relationships proved far more durable than those based on one-sided generosity. Perhaps Lorenzo's most important insight concerned the timeline of loyalty evaluation. He never judged someone's trustworthiness based on a single interaction, or even a single crisis. Instead, he observed patterns over years, noting how people's behavior evolved as circumstances changed. Some individuals who seemed disloyal during specific disagreements proved steadfast over time, while others who appeared reliable during calm periods revealed their conditional nature during storms. This patience in evaluation saved me from both premature trust and premature rejection of potentially valuable allies. I learned to distinguish between someone having a momentary lapse in judgment and someone revealing their fundamental character. The former deserved patience and possibly forgiveness. The latter required permanent distance. The principles I learned in the treacherous courts of Renaissance Italy apply with remarkable precision to modern workplace dynamics. Office politics may seem less dramatic than the life-and-death struggles of city-states, but the fundamental patterns of loyalty, betrayal, and strategic relationship management remain virtually unchanged across the centuries. On my modern desk sits a letter opener shaped like a Renaissance dagger, gift from a contemporary business leader who understood that today's corporate environments mirror the court intrigue. I once navigated the same types of people who betrayed trust in Florence now undermine colleagues in office buildings, using the same tactics of manipulation, false friendship, and strategic information sharing. The modern workplace betrayer often begins by positioning themselves as your ally and advocate. They volunteer to collaborate on projects, offer to share valuable information, and express enthusiasm for your ideas. During this honeymoon period, they're gathering intelligence about your methods, contacts, and vulnerabilities, while establishing themselves as someone you can trust with sensitive information. I've observed that contemporary betrayers frequently use what I call collaborative sabotage. They undermine your work while maintaining plausible deniability. They might fail to communicate critical information until after deadlines pass, agree to handle important tasks, then execute them poorly, or share your preliminary ideas with competitors while claiming they were trying to get feedback on your behalf. Watch carefully how colleagues handle shared credit for successes and shared responsibility for failures. Trustworthy people acknowledge others' contributions and accept their fair share of blame when projects encounter problems. Betrayers consistently minimize others' roles in successes, while ensuring that failures are attributed to anyone but themselves. The modern equivalent of court gossip is the strategic lunch meeting or after-work social gathering where absent colleagues are discussed. Pay attention to who initiates these conversations and how they frame them. Someone who regularly shares negative information about others' performance, personal lives, or professional difficulties is collecting similar ammunition about you for future use. Document everything, but do so professionally and systematically. Keep records of commitments made in meetings, decisions reached in discussions, and responsibilities assigned to different team members. This documentation protects you when betrayers later claim that agreements were different, decisions were never finalized, or responsibilities were never clearly assigned. Create what I call information firewalls around sensitive projects and strategic plans. Just as I learned to limit access to military intelligence in Florence, you must carefully control who has access to your most important work, future plans, and competitive advantages. Share information on a need-to-know basis rather than treating transparency as an absolute virtue. Recognize the signs of coalition building against you. When people who previously had little interaction suddenly begin meeting frequently, when conversations stop abruptly upon your arrival, or when you notice coordinated changes in how multiple colleagues treat you, a workplace conspiracy may be forming. Don't dismiss these observations as paranoia. They often represent accurate assessments of shifting political dynamics. The modern betrayer often uses technology to gather intelligence and spread damaging information. Be cautious about what you put in emails, text messages, or shared documents. Assume that anything you write digitally could eventually be shared with people you didn't intend to see it. This doesn't mean becoming secretive about everything, but rather being strategic about what information you commit to. Permanent, shareable formats. Learn to distinguish between healthy competition and destructive betrayal. Colleagues who compete with you openly acknowledge your strengths while working to exceed them, and maintain professional respect even during disagreements are engaging in productive rivalry. Those who use deception, sabotage, or personal attacks to gain advantage are engaging in destructive betrayal that requires defensive action. Build alliances across different levels and departments of your organization. Just as I cultivated relationships with various Florentine factions, you need supporters among peers, subordinates, and superiors. Workplace betrayers often try to isolate their targets by damaging relationships in all directions simultaneously. When betrayal occurs, respond strategically rather than emotionally. Gather evidence, document the damage, and present your case through appropriate channels. But also take immediate steps to protect yourself from further harm by adjusting what information you share, how you collaborate on projects, and which colleagues you rely upon for critical support. Finally, Remember that workplace betrayers often destroy themselves over time. Their patterns of disloyalty eventually become apparent to management and colleagues. Your goal should be protecting yourself and maintaining your professional effectiveness while allowing their reputation to suffer based on their own actions rather than your accusations. No betrayal cuts deeper than that which comes from family, for it violates not only trust but also the fundamental bonds we believe should transcend ordinary human calculations. Yet family relationships, precisely because they involve such deep emotional investment and often significant financial stakes, can become the arena for the most devastating treachery. I keep in my study a family crest that was deliberately torn in half, not by enemies of the family, but by brothers who chose greed over blood loyalty. This damaged coat of arms reminds me that family betrayal requires different strategies than other forms of treachery, because you cannot simply cut all ties and walk away. Blood relationships create permanent connections that must be managed, rather than severed. The most dangerous family betrayers are often those who use emotional manipulation as their primary weapon. They exploit your love, guilt, and sense of familial obligation to extract concessions you would never grant to strangers. They frame their demands in terms of family loyalty, while showing no loyalty themselves. And they use shared history and intimate knowledge of your vulnerabilities to apply precisely calibrated pressure. I witnessed this pattern in the Pazzi family, where Francesco de Pazzi used his position as trusted brother to gather intelligence about family financial arrangements, then shared this information with the family's enemies to secure personal advantages. When confronted, he justified his betrayal by claiming he was protecting the family's long-term interests, even as his actions were destroying them. Family betrayers often operate by creating artificial crises that require your intervention, then using your rescue efforts as opportunities for further exploitation. They may mismanage their finances deliberately, knowing you'll feel obligated to help, then use your assistance to fund lifestyle choices you would never support directly. This pattern can continue for decades if you don't recognize and interrupt it. The key to handling family betrayal is establishing clear boundaries that distinguish between supporting someone you love and enabling someone who exploits that love. You can care about a family member's welfare without accepting responsibility for their poor choices. You can maintain affection without providing unlimited resources. You can preserve relationship while protecting yourself. Document financial transactions and formal agreements, even with family members. This may feel cold and calculating, but it protects both parties by creating clear expectations and preventing later disputes about what was promised, given, or owed. Family relationships suffer more damage from unclear agreements that lead to disappointment than from explicit boundaries that prevent exploitation. Be especially cautious about family members who position themselves as intermediaries or representatives for other relatives. Someone who claims to speak for elderly parents, manage inheritances, or coordinate family financial matters may be using their position to serve their own interests while appearing to serve the family's collective good. When family betrayal involves shared assets, businesses, or properties, seek professional mediation rather than trying to resolve complex issues through family discussions alone. Emotions run too high and stakes are too significant for informal negotiation to produce fair outcomes. Professional guidance protects everyone by establishing objective frameworks for decision-making. The hardest lesson about family betrayal is that some relatives will view your success, happiness, or good fortune as a personal affront, rather than a source of joy. They may actively work to undermine your achievements, spread negative stories about your character, or attempt to sabotage your relationships with other family members. This jealousy-driven betrayal is particularly painful because it punishes you for positive accomplishments, Learn to distinguish between family members who are going through temporary difficulties and need support versus those who have made exploitation of family relationships their permanent strategy. The former deserve patience and assistance. The latter require firm boundaries and limited access to your resources. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family betrayer is to stop enabling their destructive behavior by consistently refusing to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. This approach may initially increase family tension, but it often leads to better long-term outcomes for everyone involved. Maintain relationships with trustworthy family members even when dealing with betrayers within the same family system. Don't allow one person's treachery to poison your connections with relatives who have remained loyal and supportive. Sometimes betrayers try to isolate you from other family members as part of their manipulation strategy. Finally, remember that you cannot change someone else's character through your own behavior. No matter how perfectly you demonstrate love, forgiveness, or generosity, family betrayers will often claim that they would change if only you showed more understanding, provided more support, or gave them another chance. These claims are manipulation tactics designed to extend their access to your resources while they continue their harmful patterns. Once you have identified someone as untrustworthy, you face the delicate challenge of maintaining necessary interactions while protecting yourself from further harm. This requires mastering what I call diplomatic coldness, the ability to be professionally courteous without being emotionally available, civil without being vulnerable. On my desk sits a silver goblet that remains perpetually cold to the touch, regardless of the temperature of its contents. This cup belonged to a Venetian ambassador who perfected the art of maintaining proper diplomatic relations with people he neither trusted nor liked. It reminds me that emotional temperature can be controlled independently of outward behavior. The foundation of diplomatic coldness is the separation of your inner emotional state from your external actions. You can speak politely, fulfill professional obligations, and maintain social courtesy while keeping your heart and mind completely protected from manipulation or further betrayal. This separation requires practice, but becomes natural over time. Master the art of pleasant non-engagement. When betrayers attempt to draw you into personal conversations, respond with polite but vague acknowledgments that don't invite deeper discussion. That's interesting, I see. And how about that become your standard responses to their attempts at intimacy? You're not being rude, but you're also not providing the emotional engagement they seek. Learn to deflect personal questions gracefully. When someone who has betrayed you asks about your plans, feelings, or private matters, redirect the conversation to neutral topics or professional concerns. I'm focusing on work right now. How is your project progressing? Shifts attention away from your vulnerability while maintaining conversational courtesy. Develop what I call functional interaction protocols. When you must work with untrustworthy people, establish clear, business-like procedures for how you'll communicate. Use email rather than phone calls when possible. Include others in meetings. Focus discussions on specific deliverables and avoid any interaction that isn't necessary for legitimate purposes. Practice emotional unavailability without rudeness. This means responding to their communications promptly but briefly, acknowledging their presence without warmth, and treating them with the same courteous distance you might show a stranger. They should feel that you're perfectly professional, but somehow unreachable on a personal level. Use time as a natural buffer in your interactions. Don't respond immediately to their messages unless urgent business requires it. Take longer to return phone calls, schedule meetings for shorter durations, and avoid impromptu conversations. This creates psychological distance without obvious rejection. The frozen goblet technique works particularly well in group settings where you must interact with betrayers in front of others. Maintain pleasant surface behavior while ensuring that your responses lack warmth, enthusiasm, or personal connection. Others will notice that something has changed in your relationship, but they won't be able to point to any specific rudeness or unprofessional behavior. Be prepared for escalation attempts when betrayers realize they've lost your emotional engagement. They may try to create artificial crises that require your involvement, spread stories designed to force you to defend yourself, or attempt to manipulate mutual friends or colleagues into pressuring you to restore the previous relationship dynamic. Document any attempts at manipulation or inappropriate pressure. Keep records of emails, meeting notes, and witnesses to problematic interactions. This documentation protects you if the betrayer later claims you've been hostile, uncooperative, or unprofessional in your dealings with them. Learn to distinguish between situations that require diplomatic coldness versus those that call for complete avoidance. If you must maintain professional relationships for legitimate business purposes, diplomatic coldness allows you to protect yourself while fulfilling necessary obligations. But if continued interaction serves no essential purpose, complete withdrawal may be more appropriate. Practice neutral facial expressions and body language that convey neither warmth nor hostility. Your goal is to become emotionally unreadable to someone who previously had easy access to your feelings and reactions. This psychological protection prevents them from using your emotional responses to manipulate or hurt you further. Remember that diplomatic coldness is not cruelty, it's boundary maintenance. You're not trying to punish the betrayer or make them feel bad about their actions. You're simply protecting yourself from further harm while maintaining the minimum level of interaction required by circumstances. This approach often proves more effective than dramatic confrontation because it provides them with no emotional drama to exploit or redirect. One of the most challenging situations you'll face after successfully withdrawing from a betrayer is their inevitable attempt to restore the previous relationship. Like persistent merchants returning to markets where they've been banned, betrayers often cycle back seeking renewed access to the trust and resources they previously exploited. I keep in my study a mechanical revolving door that a craftsman created. As a curiosity, it spins endlessly without ever truly opening or closing. This device perfectly represents how betrayers approach reconciliation. They want to maintain constant motion between estrangement and renewed intimacy without ever accepting the permanent consequences of their actions. Understanding why betrayers seek renewed access helps you evaluate their approaches more strategically. Rarely do they return because they've experienced genuine remorse or undergone meaningful character change. More often, they've exhausted other sources of what you previously provided with their emotional support, financial assistance, professional connections, or simply the satisfaction of manipulating someone who cared about them. The betrayer's reconciliation campaign typically follows a predictable sequence. First comes the casual contact, a seemingly innocent message asking about your well-being, congratulating you on some achievement they learned about through mutual contacts, or sharing some piece of information they claim you might find interesting. This stage tests whether your boundaries have weakened over time. If casual contact succeeds in generating any response, they escalate to what I call manufactured nostalgia. They'll reference positive memories from your relationship, remind you of times when you helped each other, or express sadness about how things deteriorated between you. This approach tries to activate your emotional attachment to the good aspects of your previous relationship while glossing over the betrayals that ended it. When nostalgia fails to restore access, betrayers often shift to crisis appeals. Suddenly, they face some emergency, tragedy, or overwhelming challenge that requires exactly the type of support you previously provided. These crises are either completely fabricated or deliberately created to manipulate your sympathies and override your rational judgment about their character. The most sophisticated betrayers employ what I call reformed character presentations. They claim to have learned from their mistakes, undergone personal growth, or experienced life changes that have transformed their values and behavior. They may provide examples of how they've treated other people better, cite therapy or spiritual development, or point to external circumstances that supposedly force them to mature. Evaluating these claims requires careful analysis rather than emotional response. Ask yourself, what evidence exists that this person has actually changed rather than simply learned to speak differently about their behavior? Have they made meaningful amends to other people they've harmed? Do their current actions align with their stated transformation, or are they simply using new language to justify old patterns? Be particularly suspicious of apologies that focus more on your reaction than on their actions. Genuine remorse acknowledges specific harmful behaviors and takes responsibility for the damage caused. Manipulative apologies emphasize how sorry they are that you were hurt, how much they miss your relationship, or how sad they are about the misunderstanding between you. True character change is demonstrated through consistent patterns over extended periods, particularly when the person faces similar temptations or pressures that previously led to betrayal. Someone who claims transformation but hasn't been tested by circumstances resembling those that triggered their original betrayal hasn't proven anything meaningful about their development. Consider the opportunity cost of giving betrayers second chances. Every bit of energy you invest in evaluating their claims, testing their sincerity, and monitoring their behavior is energy unavailable for building stronger relationships with trustworthy people. Even if they have genuinely changed, the time and emotional resources required to verify and rebuild trust might be better invested elsewhere. Sometimes the kindest response to a betrayer's reconciliation attempt is polite but firm refusal. This protects both of you from the inevitable disappointment that occurs when character hasn't really changed despite claims to the contrary. It also frees them to focus their transformation efforts on relationships where they haven't already established patterns of harmful behavior. When you do decide to give someone a genuine second chance, should be rare and based on compelling evidence of real change. Establish clear, limited parameters for renewed interaction. Don't immediately restore the previous level of trust, access, or emotional investment. Create opportunities for them to demonstrate reliable character over time before gradually increasing your vulnerability. Remember that refusing reconciliation doesn't make you unforgiving or cruel. Forgiveness doesn't require restoration of relationship. You can release anger and resentment without reopening yourself to further exploitation. Protecting yourself from people who have proven themselves harmful is not only acceptable, it's wise. Your response to betrayal serves as a powerful teaching tool that instructs everyone around you about how you expect to be treated, like a master craftsman demonstrating proper technique to apprentices. Your handling of treachery shows others what behavior you will tolerate and what actions will result in consequences. I keep on my shelf a wooden pointer that belonged to a Renaissance teacher, worn smooth by decades of use in classroom instruction. This simple tool reminds me that every interaction teaches something about your character and expectations. When you respond to betrayal with appropriate firmness, you educate potential future betrayers about the costs of crossing you. People observe how you handle those who harm you, and they adjust their own behavior accordingly. If they see that betraying you results in nothing more than temporary disappointment followed by restored relationship, they learn that your boundaries are meaningless. If they witness swift, proportional consequences for breaches of trust, they understand that loyalty matters to you and disloyalty carries genuine costs. This educational aspect extends beyond the immediate betrayer to everyone in your personal and professional networks. Colleagues, friends, and family members all note how you respond when someone violates your trust. Your reaction becomes part of your reputation. Are you someone whose goodwill can be exploited indefinitely, or someone whose respect must be earned and maintained through consistent behavior? I learned this lesson while observing how different leaders in Florence handled betrayal. Those who consistently forgave and forgot found themselves surrounded by increasingly bold schemers who viewed the leader's position as an opportunity for personal advancement. But leaders who responded to treachery with measured firmness attracted more reliable allies who appreciated working with someone who valued loyalty. Your example also teaches trustworthy people how much their loyalty means to you. When you fail to distinguish between those who support you and those who undermine you, loyal allies begin to question why they should maintain higher standards. They see that faithfulness provides no advantage over faithlessness, and may begin reducing their own commitment to your relationship. Conversely, when you clearly reward loyalty and punish betrayal, you signal to trustworthy people that their integrity matters and will be recognized. This differential treatment encourages the behavior you want to see and discourages the behavior you want to avoid. Good people feel appreciated and protected, while potential betrayers understand they'll face real consequences. The educational power of your response extends to future relationships as well. People who are considering whether to associate with you evaluate how you've handled previous relationships. If they see a pattern of being exploited by untrustworthy individuals, they may question your judgment or assume you'll be easily manipulated by them as well. But if they observe that you build strong relationships with reliable people while maintaining firm boundaries with those who prove untrustworthy, they're more likely to respect your judgment and treat you with appropriate consideration from the beginning. Your reputation for handling betrayal strategically becomes part of your personal brand. Teaching through example also means demonstrating how to maintain dignity while protecting yourself. You show others that it's possible to be firm without being cruel, strategic without being ruthless, and protective without being paranoid. This modeling helps create a culture around you where people understand that accountability and consequences are normal parts of healthy relationships. The ripple effects of your example can extend far beyond your immediate circle. When you handle betrayal appropriately, you may inspire others to examine their own tolerance for mistreatment. Friends who have been accepting unacceptable behavior from their own betrayers may find courage to establish better boundaries after watching your example. Your children, if you have them, learn particularly powerful lessons from observing how you handle betrayal. They see whether you allow people to take advantage of your kindness, and they develop their own expectations about how relationships should function. Teaching them through example that loyalty should be valued and betrayal should have consequences helps them develop healthier relationship patterns in their own lives. Remember that teaching through example doesn't require dramatic gestures or public proclamations. Often the most powerful lessons come from quiet consistency, the steady pattern of treating trustworthy people well, while maintaining appropriate distance from those who have proven themselves unreliable. This subtle but persistent demonstration of your values speaks louder than any speech about what you believe. Relationships should be the most surprising discovery in my journey from naive trust to strategic wisdom was the profound sense of liberation that comes from releasing toxic relationships. Far from making me cynical or isolated, learning to detach from betrayers opened space in my life for deeper, more authentic connections with trustworthy people. On my desk sits a single phoenix feather, preserved in crystallure, gift from a friend, who understood that sometimes relationships must burn away completely before something better can rise from their ashes. This feather represents the rebirth that becomes possible when you stop pouring energy into connections that drain your spirit and diminish your joy. The energy you've been spending on managing betrayers, anticipating their next harmful action, absorbing their emotional chaos, cleaning up the damage they create, suddenly becomes available for more constructive purposes. I was amazed to discover how much mental and emotional capacity I had been unconsciously dedicating to relationships that provided no genuine satisfaction or support. When you stop accepting poor treatment as normal, your standards for all relationships naturally rise. You begin to recognize and appreciate the people who have been treating you well all along, friends who keep their commitments, colleagues who share credit generously, family members who support your success rather than undermining it. These relationships deepen and flourish when you're no longer distracted by managing problematic ones. Strategic detachment also frees you from the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that characterizes relationships with betrayers. You no longer waste emotional energy wondering if they'll finally change, whether this time their apology is sincere, or how you might adjust your behavior to earn their loyalty. This mental freedom allows you to focus on goals and relationships that actually deserve your attention. I found that my decision-making improved dramatically once I stopped factoring betrayers' reactions into my choices. Previously, I had been unconsciously limiting my options to avoid triggering their jealousy, anger, or sabotage attempts. When I no longer cared about their approval or feared their retaliation, I could pursue opportunities and make decisions based purely on merit and my own judgment. The physical effects of releasing toxic relationships often surprise people. When you're no longer constantly stressed about someone's next betrayal or manipulation attempt, your sleep improves, your appetite normalizes, and your overall health benefits. The chronic low-level anxiety that comes from maintaining relationships with untrustworthy people dissipates, leaving you feeling lighter and more energetic. Strategic detachment also enhances your ability to help others effectively. When you're not depleting your resources on people who exploit your generosity, you have more to offer those who will use your support constructively. Your assistance becomes more impactful because it goes to people who build upon what you provide rather than simply consuming it. Perhaps most importantly, removing betrayers from your inner circle allows you to be more authentic in your remaining relationships. You no longer need to guard your words carefully, withhold information to prevent misuse, or maintain emotional shields to protect yourself from manipulation. With trustworthy people, you can be genuinely open without fear of exploitation. This authenticity creates a positive feedback loop that attracts more trustworthy individuals to your life. People who value genuine connection are drawn to others who can offer it, while those seeking relationships to exploit recognize that you're no longer an easy target and often move on to more vulnerable victims. The liberation extends to your professional life as well. When you stop accommodating colleagues who undermine your work or take credit for your ideas, your actual contributions become more visible. Your competence shines brighter when it's not being dimmed by others' sabotage or overshadowed by your efforts to manage their problematic behavior. Strategic detachment doesn't mean becoming cold or suspicious of everyone. Instead, it means becoming more discerning about where you invest your trust and emotional energy. You remain open to genuine connection while maintaining appropriate boundaries with those who haven't earned or who have forfeited your confidence. The peace that comes from this approach is profound. When you know that everyone in your inner circle has demonstrated their trustworthiness over time, you can relax into your relationships without constant vigilance. You sleep better knowing that the people with access to your vulnerabilities have proven they won't exploit them. Finally, strategic detachment models healthy relationship standards for everyone around you. Others observe your newfound peace and effectiveness, and many begin examining their own tolerance for toxic relationships. Your liberation becomes an invitation for others to consider what might be possible if they too stopped accepting betrayal as an inevitable part of life. The transformation from someone who repeatedly absorbs betrayal to someone who maintains strategic boundaries is not just personal improvement, it's a form of leadership that elevates the standards of everyone in your sphere of influence. You demonstrate that loyalty and trustworthiness are not outdated concepts, but essential foundations for any relationship worth maintaining. As I near the end of my life and reflect on the lessons that betrayal has taught me, I am compelled to share what I consider the most important insights about the delicate balance between remaining open to human connection and protecting yourself from those who would exploit that openness. The quill with which I write these final thoughts is stained with ink from years of correspondence, treaties, and observations about human nature. It has recorded both the noblest expressions of loyalty and the most calculating acts of treachery. This instrument reminds me that words have the power to build trust or destroy it, to heal relationships or wound them beyond repair. The greatest misconception about my philosophy is that learning to recognize and respond to betrayal makes you cynical or closed-hearted. The opposite is true. When you develop the wisdom to distinguish between those who deserve your trust and those who would abuse it, you become free to love more deeply, give more generously, and connect more authentically with people who have proven themselves worthy of these gifts. I am not advocating for a world without trust or mercy. I am advocating for strategic trust and earned mercy. The difference lies in understanding that these precious resources should be allocated based on evidence of character rather than hope for transformation. When you give your trust to those who have demonstrated trustworthiness and show mercy to those who have genuinely earned it, both gifts become more meaningful and more likely to produce positive outcomes. The hardest lesson I learned is that some people are simply incapable of the kind of loyalty and integrity that healthy relationships require. This is not a moral judgment. It is an observation about human nature. Just as some people are born without the ability to carry a tune or solve mathematical problems, some are born without the capacity for genuine loyalty or empathy. Recognizing this reality is not cruel. It is realistic. Your obligation is not to fix these individuals or to absorb the damage they cause while hoping they will change. Your obligation is to protect yourself and those you care about from their harmful impact while building strong relationships with people who share your values and standards. The political world taught me that power without the wisdom to use it appropriately becomes tyranny, but wisdom without the power to implement it becomes The same principle applies to personal relationships. Kindness without boundaries becomes enablement, but boundaries without kindness become cruelty. The art lies in combining both qualities appropriately. I have seen too many good people destroyed, not by their enemies, but by their refusal to acknowledge that some of their friends had become enemies. The loyalty they showed to those who betrayed them prevented them from building stronger alliances with those who would have remained faithful. This misallocation of trust weakened them strategically and personally. My advice to future generations is this: remain open to genuine connection, but make people earn your deepest trust through consistent actions over time. Be generous with your kindness, but not with your vulnerability. Show mercy to those who deserve it, but do not continue extending mercy to those who use it as permission to harm you repeatedly. Learn to read the signs of character early in relationships. Pay attention to how people treat those who cannot benefit them. Notice whether they keep small commitments as carefully as large ones. Observe how they handle information you share in confidence. Watch their reaction when your success doesn't directly benefit them. These behaviors predict how they will treat you when the relationship becomes challenging or when betraying you might serve their interests. Build your life around a small circle of people who have proven their loyalty through their actions, not their words. Invest deeply in these relationships, protect these individuals fiercely, and allow them to know and care for the real you. With everyone else, maintain appropriate boundaries that protect your resources and vulnerabilities, while allowing for pleasant interaction and potential. Future trust if they prove themselves worthy. Remember that every moment you spend managing Relationships with people who harm you is a moment unavailable for nurturing relationships with people who deserve your love and attention. Time is your most precious resource, and how you allocate it reflects your values and determines your happiness. The legacy I hope to leave is not one of cynicism or suspicion, but of strategic wisdom about human relationships. I want people to understand that protecting yourself from betrayers is not only acceptable, it is necessary for creating the space and energy required for genuine love, trust, and loyalty to flourish. In a world where many people have forgotten that loyalty has value and that betrayal should have consequences, be someone who remembers. Be someone who rewards faithfulness and responds appropriately to treachery. Be someone who demonstrates that treating others well is not weakness, but strength, and that allowing others to treat you poorly is not virtue, but folly. The balance between trust and wisdom, between openness and protection, between mercy and justice. This is the art of living well among both saints and sinners. Master this balance, and you will find that life becomes not harder but easier, not colder but warmer, not lonelier but filled with deeper and more authentic connections than you ever thought possible.